Hi, my name's Nick, and this is Imperator Rome. I just wanted to make a short little video reviewing, or at least giving my opinions on this game. Whether you should buy it, whether or not I think it's a good game, what I think its flaws are, what I think its strengths are. I'm going to leave till the end a rant about two aspects, the mana system and the lack of flavour in scare quotes. Just because those are two topics that I can rant about a lot more, or at least feel like ranting about a lot more. And I wanted to leave those to last so that if you wanted to hear my opinions, you can keep on listening. If you don't want to hear my opinions, you can just hear this short little summary at the start. So let's just jump into that. In summary, do I think you should get this game? If you enjoyed Europa Universalis 4, then you may enjoy this game. If you hate Europa Universalis 4, if you don't find that gameplay enjoyable, then you will almost certainly not enjoy this game. It is much more close to EU4 than it is to Paradox's other titles, and it shares certain mechanics that if you found those mechanics boring in EU4, you will definitely find them boring here, because they are less deep and have less potential options, or there's less opportunity cost. So just to briefly touch on the mana system, lots of people have an issue with the mana system. I'll discuss that issue at the end, but the pertinent point about mana in this game, Imperator Rome versus EU4, is that in EU4 each of those mana, each of these powers, monarch powers, military power, civic power, etc., have a lot less things to do with them, and thus there's a lot less opportunity cost than there is in EU4, because there's so many things that you could be spending your monarch points on. In EU4 there is inherently more complexity and more trade-offs and more strategy to it. So if you don't like monarch points in EU4, you will definitely not like them in here. This game is not as replayable, and it is not as deep or as complex as other Paradox titles. And I would say even compared to EU4 on launch and Crusader Kings 2 on launch and Stellaris on launch and Hearts of Iron 4 on launch, I would say that this game has less possible fun things to do and will wear out its welcome faster. So that may be enough for you to completely shape your opinions on whether or not to get the game. As to more specific things that I find annoying, there are certainly lots of UI issues, and there are lots of unnecessary micro issues. I recorded this whole review, and then it was only afterwards that I realized that I had missed the most glaring example of unnecessary micromanagement in this game. So if you excuse me, I'm just going to complain about tactics, and then I'm going to go back to my original review where I was complaining about, of all things, pop movement, which is a minor quibble. Anyway, tactics in this game. You have this choice of tactics for your armies. On the surface, on the face of it, you think, oh, this is an interesting feature to the game. The tactics have different effectivenesses depending on the unit composition of your armies. The tactics counter other tactics. That's strategic, it's tactical. It's I can look at the enemy and go, oh, they're using that tactic, and I'm going to counter with this tactic, or that enemy, that barbarian enemy, they're like always skirmishing us. So like barbarians always skirmish because they're mostly light units, and so the mighty Rome with all my heavy infantry, I will use bottleneck. And actually, that's bottleneck is weak against skirmishing. I mean, I'll use I'll use some light cavalry to engage and use deception against their skirmishing tactic, and I will this is intelligent play from me. But so much of the time it just ends up being a random dice roll where, have you chosen the tactic to counter what the AI has chosen? Should you choose the tactic that counters the last tactic the AI used, or would the AI be changing their mind? Like, there's nothing to stop you keeping on changing your tactics all the time, and there's nothing to stop you using a tactic that doesn't suit your units. If the enemy is using envelopment, despite the fact that I have no heavy troops, I should use shock action to defeat their envelopment, like if I know for certain. But there's no covert way of, like, there's no spying to discover what their tactics are. I mean, I could send in a small army, which is kind of like, you're kind of scouting the enemy tactic by sending a small army into battle, and then your big army follows. But that battle has to end before the next one arrives. So yeah, you wait for that battle to end, and maybe the AI changes their tactic. Who knows? And yeah, it's just, I don't feel it adds anything at all to this game. It's just a thing that sometimes you forget to change your tactics, and suddenly you get like destroyed in a battle that you thought you were going to win just because you had the wrong matchup. And then the matching up is just like, it's just too much of a roll of the dice. And given that I assume that this choice was put in because people were kind of annoyed that tactics in Crusader Kings was just a dice roll, this is just a dice roll, just like in E4, basically. Like, it's not as meaningful as it first looks. But yeah, so back to me talking about how annoying it is to move pops around the place. Just in terms of, for instance, moving your pops around, it ends up being a very much like you have to click here and then move the pops to. So for instance, if I wanted to, because I've been doing some colonization, you can move pops within provinces. That's like these collections of cities, and you can move them across the border to a neighboring city. So because of that, I've been moving, because I'm colonizing, and colonizing requires you to build up a city to have at least 10 population in it, and then you can colonize out. So for instance, I colonized Sharita right next door. You can move pops out to a neighboring thing. So I mean, actually, can I just so yeah, if I had 10 population here, I would be able to move it into those three, but I can't, not just because I don't have 10, but also because I haven't completely converted this province to my culture. But yes, because of all the pop moving that's required for that, it becomes really tedious. There's no easy way to just like move pops from one side of your empire to the other. I mean, they could well make it cost more to do so, but if I wanted to move a pop from Rugia to Sharita, for instance, I would need to move that pop manually from here to one of the border provinces, border cities here, and then manually move it from the border city to the next province, and manually move it from that city to a province on this border, and then manually move it across this border, and then manually move it to another city that's bordering on the next province, and then manually move it across to like Gorodiva, I guess. Or actually, I could have manually moved it to Marinot in the first place, and then manually moved it to Sharita. You can understand how that can get very tedious. and annoying, and it's unnecessary to do that because it costs an amount of civic power each time. Why not just make you be able to move it all the way across and it just cost more civic power? That's as an example, but maybe there are definite reasons why that is the case. You can't make that that happen. But there are lots of other examples where it's just and actually, on the note of colonization, people have complained about how if you go to, say, actually can't even see the colonize menu at this point, but if you go to colonize somewhere, you'll have a list of all the pops in the neighboring province, and you'll have to select which one you're colonizing with, and that includes slaves, even though you can't colonize with the slaves. So it'll be grayed out, but the button's still there. So why did they do that? There's lots of other kind of just, the UI does not feel that polished, and it feels a bit clunky and annoying at times, and it's sometimes hard to find the information, especially for instance, like, if you wanted to see the particular makeup of where the pops are, you'd have to manually hover over, and there's no map mode that just gives you, I mean, you can see the population map mode, but there's no like citizen map mode. I can't see where the citizens are on the map. I'd need to manually go through all of that. Anyway, so it's just UI, some issues. Even more than the UI, I'm really perplexed by the message settings of this game, which is, I guess, not something that many people have raised, and maybe many people care about. But in case you didn't know, you can set the message settings, which basically sets whether something will pause the game, whether it will pop up or not, whether it just shows in the log. The log is a lot less usable than, like, it's not as good as the EU4 log. It's, for some reason, they've made it bigger. It thus can hold less bigger and more spacing between the things. It thus can hold less information. It isn't as readable, but I don't generally look at the log. But what I do want is for there to be pop-ups when something that I feel is important and needs my attention needs to get to my attention. The biggest failing I found with this game is that when I am at war with someone, if they bring in a new ally, like make a new alliance and bring that ally into the war, I get no notification of that. And I've looked through the message settings, and maybe I just can't see it. Maybe it's really obvious, but the only one I can find, the only message setting I can find in this entire thing that would give me that information is the setting that says, tell me when a nation makes a new alliance. A nation in the entire world. I don't want to get pop-ups for every alliance that ever gets made. In every other game, every other Paradox game, you can set, I guess, every is a bit too extreme, but yeah, anyway, in EU4 and in CK and many others, you can set importance. So you have these settings for for neighbors or important characters, or important characters or nations of significance to you, so that I could set up to have a pop-up whenever one of my, whenever the countries I'm interested in makes a new alliance, and not get a pop-up for all the other alliances that get made in the game. And I just don't understand why they simplified the message settings so much, in that way. Why take that step backwards? Now, to get into what I do like about this game a lot, just to change it up a bit, I really like this map. Like, I really like the detail and the drawing, and it looks amazing. Like, it looks really vivid and lush, and like you can look at the famous bread bowls of the world, or rice bowls, the famous cradles of civilization, and you can say, oh yeah, I can completely understand why civilization popped up in the Indus Valley, or why it popped up in Babylon, like in Mesopotamia. You can see that looks like an attractive place. And the Nile looks amazing. Like, you can see that's why people lusted after this land so much. And similarly, the desolate wastes look unfriendly, uninviting. The barbarian north genuinely, looks kind of hostile, and it looks unfriendly to human life, especially at winter when everything is covered in white. Though that is actually, I guess, the one complaint I've had about the map is just during winter, being up in the Baltic, everything just gets covered in white, and you can't see things as well. You can't see the borders as well, and you can't see the names as well, and just the terrain. Like, you've got a lot less clarity of information. So often I have to switch to a different map mode on during winter, especially the political. Like, I really like the way that the political colors merge into the terrain map mode. I like this border shading and all of that, but it's just in winter you can't actually see that color as well, and it's a lot less visible to work out which country is which. But that's my only complaint about the map. Similarly, I like the quality of the drawing, the art, the character models. Like, they all look nice. The quality of the event artwork, and we can look at the tradition artwork. Like, there is a lot of really nice art in here, and there's a lot of attractive sound design and music design. Some of the UI sounds get a bit annoying. So all these chisel sounds, when you hear the tab sounds too much, like, I had to turn my UI sounds down. Actually, can we get an actual chisel? Oh, actually, I know where there's. That chisel, the stone grating on stone sound gets very grating eventually. So there's a bit of overuse of that, but apart from that, like, it is vivid and nice in quality of the sound. Now, performance, I haven't had any performance issues. I know other people have had performance issues. I've heard lots of complaints about stuttering and this and that. I don't have any complaints about performance. So I guess that is a case of your mileage may vary. But I certainly, I don't have that issue. Now, my rants about mana and flavour. So I guess I should be a bit more clear about what I mean by flavour. Various people I've seen, reviewers or people on the forum, have complained about a lack of flavour in different countries. Now, I agree with them in one sense of that, and I disagree in another sense. Or I guess I ideologically disagree in another sense. So in terms of the lack of events or of, I guess, feeling, this, like, the cultural life of every country does not feel that vivid. And certainly, actually, religious, like, the differences between the religions, there is no difference between the religions. There's just some different names. And that does not feel very satisfying. it does not feel interesting to choose, in my case, to play the only Baltic country. So my culture, Aestian, is the only Baltic culture in the game, and my religion, Matrist, is also this unique, or Matrist is this unique religion that no one else in the game has. So this country is unique in both culture and religion, and yet neither of those really matter. It's just a different name and a different color. And what it does boil down to essentially is that I have a lot less of the map that is starting off with my color of religion and culture, and so I need to put a lot more effort in painting the map my color, because I have to put a lot more points into conversion and assimilation than I otherwise might. If I played a Germanic country, for instance, maybe I would have all of these other places that have similar cultures who wouldn't hate me as much. So I've colonized some places, and these places are kinds of Germanic, and they have unrest, and I have to assimilate them in order to fix that. That's an interesting part, that is part of a cultural differences, and that's part of the mechanics of the game. But the fact that my culture itself does not have any interesting flavor to it does feel shallow and empty, because it just ends up being a different color. But in the other sense of flavor, I've seen people complaining, for instance, that Rome doesn't have special Roman, unique Roman ideas and unique Roman abilities, and Carthage doesn't have unique Carthaginian decisions and abilities. Actually, I think decisions, there are some unique decisions, but that there aren't unique kind of qualities to each of these countries. Personally, in an ideological sense, I disagree with putting those kind of unique things in the game. I know that Paradox is going to put those unique kinds of things in the game, those unique national ideas or national traditions or whatever. I know there will be DLC that will come out that will have those things, but I don't like that in Paradox games. I put up with it, and it can be a bit interesting because, for instance, in EU4 there are hundreds of countries, and so you can find there are lots of little minor countries that have special unique national ideas, and you can that can be fun to play with, that you take this minor that has this obscure set of national ideas and you make them huge, and you have that unique set of national ideas. That can be interesting, and it can lead to unique gameplay. But personally, I kind of dislike when games railroad, in a sense, railroad in that this country, just because it's called Rome, is inherently better at these specific things. I prefer for all of those powers to be things that are in my control, so that either that they're geographical. So, for instance, with the example of Europa Universalis 4 with Russia, it annoys me that Russia inherently has bonuses to manpower, or at least launched. When the game first came out, it had inherent bonuses to manpower. That to me seems silly. What it instead should be is that Russia has a lot of manpower because it has a lot of land, and that land maybe is high in manpower, so that it is a consequence of the situation, whether geographically or culturally. So, for instance, that there would be national ideas that you choose, or cultural decisions that you make that shape your culture, or are pre-existing at game start, that any other nation could choose to get if they put in the effort. So I don't think Rome was destined to conquer the Mediterranean. I think Rome made certain decisions over time. Its culture did play a role, but that culture was also shaped by the times and changed with the times. I think that the glory of Rome and the advantages of the Roman Republic and Roman Empire were actively choices made by leaders at various times. And so I'd prefer having that depth of simulation where you could simulate Rome, simulate making your country into the Rome that it was, rather than having that as this inbuilt, baked in ability that Rome is just better at heavy infantry. I mean, Rome is actually just better at heavy infantry because their military traditions, I don't think I can look at their military traditions here, or can I? Oh yeah, I can see that. Inherently, as an italic country, it has certain traditions, so it gets inherent fort defense and sieging abilities should it choose. It has different tradition options than I do as a barbarian tribe. Now, this kind of thing where there's still choice, it feels a bit more realistic, and I can understand why barbarian cultures, as it were, and especially because of the narrow time window of this game, like it starts and finishes within a few hundred years. There's not really that much space for a culture to change that much. So I can accept this more, but Rome itself just having some ability, like special ability, just because it's Rome, that I'm less in favor of. Now, in terms of the mana question, I've seen lots of people saying that this is a shallow and boring game because of mana, and because Paradox loves mana, and by mana I mean monarch power or leader power. I don't think that is the case, and as I touched on at the start, I think there's there is definitely an issue with monarch power in this game compared to EU4, because in EU4 there are a lot more options of what to do with your monarch power, and because of that it seems like there are more complicated trade-offs. But monarch power as a system and as a concept, I don't think that's inherently unstrategic or inherently boring, because when it comes down to it, what is strategy? Strategy is having to make decisions and trade-offs and assess opportunity cost and make do with the resources that you have. Monarch points are resources that you have. You have to make a choice about, am I going to spend my civic power on moving my population around and colonizing places? I increasingly feel I am wasting my civic power by doing this. Like, I'm not actually gaining that much from spending all these civic points moving around colonists when I could be doing other things, such as taking inventions. Like, I've only taken 2 inventions in the entire game so far, because I've been spending all of this civic power on colonizing slowly and shifting my population around. That's a meaningful trade-off. That's a decision that I actively have to make, and that is a resource that I have due to my particular leader and the stats of my leader. I have less civic power than I otherwise would. I think that is an interesting that can be interesting. The issue with this game is that there are some kinds of monarch power, religious power especially, and military power actually, where there just are not really that many things you can do with it, and thus it becomes this trivial, boring kind of, whenever so some of these colonies that I've made, like when I colonize a new place, I'll just convert all the population by going to my macro builder, convert pops, find the pops that need converting. Sometimes a non-matrixed or non-matrixed pop will pop up, so to speak. Where's a place that's still being a bit troublesome? Yeah, for instance here, basically population growth, whatever was the dominant culture and religion when the pop started growing, it was continued to have that. So so despite the fact I've converted this province to ASTN matrix, it's still creating a Gothonic citizen following the Tuistic faith. So anyway, when that pop finishes growing, I'll need to convert that pop with my religious power. But that is all that happens. I just spend the religious power to do that, and then there's also omens that I can spend religious power on, and stability. But I have a lot more religious power than I need, and even if I was running out of religious power, it wouldn't really be that meaningful a decision, like what I do with it. Like I would simply have to wait longer for my religious power to replenish in order to get the things done, but still I'm just waiting to get the points and get the, like, press the button. And in that sense, the mana system, I understand why people see that as like shallow and just boring and just turns the game into a waiting game, and just watching a number like tick up and then press a button. I understand why they can look at that, and just military power, there isn't really that much I can do with military power. Just buy another tradition. Sometimes there are some other things I spend military power on, but it's not a meaningful trade-off. Civic power and oratory power, there are a lot more things you can do, and thus you have to be a bit more cautious or strategic with those power points. And in Europa Universalis 4, there will be events that pop up that that eat away your power, and that you need to spend things on. I guess in that sense, E4, because you can just spend that power, like, because that power just gets deducted, you don't have to have it in reserve. So with gold, I guess, is the bigger thing. Like, you can't go into negative in gold and have no consequences. So the issue with the power system is not that it is a mana system, it's an issue with there being little incentive to have a giant stockpile of it. If you had to keep a stockpile of mana in order to deal with different situations, and if you had a lot more competing demands on that mana, so that you had to weigh up your options a lot more, I think that would lead to a lot more strategic and deep gameplay. I don't think it's the mana's fault, and people who are blaming a monarch power abstraction, because it's an abstraction of things. I don't think monarch power versus the mean time to happen based system that the previous Paradox games were really centered around mean time to happen, where you were just like, oh, I want to get this thing done, I'm just going to plonk, I'm going to press a button, and I'm going to wait a random amount of time, and it might happen. I don't think that is necessarily more strategic than having mana points. I think the mana points and the way they've been implemented and the lack of things to do with them, that's the issue. Because you can have just as strategic a game with mana points. Anyway, I'm losing my voice, and I've talked far too much about some, at the end of the day, pretty petty issues. So I'm going to wrap it up there. See you on the internet.